I want to start with a question that probably everyone has had at some point. Where does the name Nano Banana come from?
It turns out if you have a PM who's very tired at 2:30 in the morning and you ask her to name a model.
Okay, great.
The thing we are most proud of is our character consistency. You can take something that is so dear to yourself and then kind of reimagine them in a whole bunch of different situations, right? And that's just incredibly magical.
It's now not only where you basically specify something very specific in text, it's now that you can also make it actually reason about the input images. Sometimes an image says more than 1,000 words, and that is something that we really want to enable with this interleaved model.
Demis Hassab has tweeted, the Gemini app is now the most downloaded app on the App Store, but is Nano Banana the main factor behind the global surge in downloads right now?
I think we're definitely the one melting our TPUs the most, as our teams would tell us. We're at the start. We've come to the start of the racetrack. Now we're like, right, let's do this. Let's just go for it.
Today's a very exciting day. I have the team that's been working on Google's exciting new Nano Banana image model. I have Naina Raisinghani, who works on the product team, and I have Phillip Lippe, who works on the research side of things. Really excited to have you both here today.
Thank you for having us. It's an honor.
I have a lot of serious questions about the product side, the research side, the use cases, everything else, but I want to start with a question that probably everyone who's used this model has had at some point. Where does the name Nano Banana come from? Was this a deliberate effort, or was this sort of like a fun thing that happened over time?
It turns out if you have a PM who's very tired at 2:30 in the morning and you ask her to name a model, it will this is what happened. I was just really tired at 2:30 at night and we were asked, hey, this model is great. We need a code name because we're going to put it on Ella Marina and give early access to our partners. What should the code name be? Let's do something fun like Nano Banana. And it's taken off by storm. I keep saying people came for the name, but they stayed for the model. And it just shows with the excitement people have.
Yeah, agreed. I think for a lot of folks, that's the models have sometimes such complicated names, and I get it. For developers, you want to have proper naming, Gemini 2.5 Flash Preview XYZ May, June, July, and so on. And I get that, but I think for the average consumer, just having a name like Nano Banana is just so much more convenient. So let's get into the nitty gritty of it. It's been taking over the internet. It's been super viral. There's been reports going around that it's driving the Gemini app to the top of the App Store charts. For folks who've used it or haven't used it yet, what's really new with this model and why should folks care about it?
Our most proud of is our character consistency. You can take something that is so dear to yourself, such as an image of yourself, your family, your pets, and then kind of reimagine them in a whole bunch of different situations, right? You can take a family trip to Paris without actually having been there. You can see what you would look like on a 90s sitcom. And it keeps your character, your hair, your smile, your face very consistent. And that's just incredibly magical. But then there's more as well. We're very good at the hyper local edits. You want to remove the people in the background. That's probably been my volume based, the query I've used the most. Remove the people in the background. Because who has time to kind of take the image, get everyone removed from the background? But it works so great for that. And then I think the thing, and I'll let Phillip talk about how excited it is that you get this leverage Gemini's world knowledge and its multimodal understanding in this one model space. And it makes it really exciting to play with and do a whole bunch of use cases that we can probably talk your ear off. But I'll let Phillip talk about that one.
Okay, before we move on, a quick message from our friends and partners at Vanta. The right kind of security can make a deal or break it. Vanta's AI and technology make it easy for fast-moving startups to get ready to meet buyer expectations in just a few days. Vanta's technology continuously monitors your compliance so your deals are never blocked. And our listeners get a special $1,000 discount when they sign up. Just go to vanta.com/superhuman. That's VANTA.com/superhuman.
Yeah, it's actually very exciting to see essentially how general the model is for editing, because it's now not only where you basically specify something very specific in text, it's now that you can also make it actually reason about the input images. We have seen the examples of where people put in a screenshot of Google Maps and say basically, okay, reimagine this scene now from basically the actual point of view of a person standing there. And that's clearly something that I think our previous models were not that great at, but now with a better understanding of Gemini and better world knowledge, you can actually make like edits that require reasoning first. And that is something that just from the whole LLM space, like we get all of the benefits now into actually one native model that can do both image generation and actually also the reasoning side, which is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one internal benchmark that I've had for image models, and this Nano Banana was the first one that passed it, was I always take this. There's like this famous historical image of the philosopher mathematician Archimedes and like his lever, and like the other side of the lever, he's lifting like the planet, right? So the idea that give me a lever long enough and I'll lift the world. So what I always do is like I try to reproduce this with other models, and it always gets the physics wrong. It might get the facial consistency right, it might get the other details right, but what it never gets right is the actual physics of the lever. Like the lever is always misplaced or something's just going on, but anyone who can look at it will basically say that's not how like gravity or levers or fulcrums really work. Nano Banana was the first one where actually I just gave it the image and I said reproduce this in a different style. It did it, and then I said, okay, change the globe and make it the planet Jupiter. Did a fantastic job. I was like, okay, instead of an old guy, which is Archimedes, make it a young woman. Also managed to do that. So I
Right.
think it's important to preserve facial details, but at least for me, I'm glad that we can preserve some physics within within the output as well now. Awesome. That's a great overview for everything new that's on the model. Whenever new models come out, of course, they go viral because there's some kind of, with ChatGPT, we saw the Studio Ghibli trend. Here, we saw the action figure trend. We saw a few other things that happened, viral trends with the model as well. For folks who are listening in, what are the real business use cases of this thing, right? Because I think it's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to remove, my puppy from my background, or I'm going to, make myself look like a famous, celebrity or something like that. But on a day-to-day work basis, like what are the use cases that are coming up for this model?
I think we're seeing Gemini kind of really be our collaborator on all different surfaces. And we're seeing a lot of apps kind of like developers build around this use case, like the ability to do virtual try-ons, the ability to like you're looking at a store and you have a product and being able to physically place it at your home and like actually see what it would look like in your space. That's a really powerful use cases that developers are leaning into. So it's like Gemini as like your stylist, like your personal stylist, but also your like interior decorator. And then it's like even further, it's your collaborator. I think the whole end-to-end journey of saying, hey, I want to create an ad. Can you create some like, and here's my brand and here's kind of the event I'm planning for. Can you create some interesting ads for me? Gemini can start to like, as Philip's called out, reason about it, think about, okay, this would be an interesting connection to make. Like if you're a car manufacturer making a tennis ad for the US Open, for example, let's have some tennis balls thrown in. The fact that Gemini can kind of do that, like be collaborative with you, I think is incredibly powerful. And I want to see more use cases in that space for sure.
I guess, Philip, next question I want to direct this towards you. The most interesting aspect or the most useful aspect for me with this model has been the speed. I think, we're reaching a point with models where like everything looks realistic enough, right? Like, okay, there's minor details here or there where if you really want to, 5x, 10x zoom in and figure out one here that's out of place, you can do that. But for the most part, every model, I think, every major image model looks very realistic. So speed was like a big thing for me. Before this call, I told you guys how, I hate having to wait, 20, 30, sometimes 60 seconds for an image to generate, especially when I'm in the flow and, just so interruptive. Here it takes about, 2 to 4 seconds, sometimes takes like 5, 6 seconds, but I don't think I've waited more than 5 seconds for an image with this model. Can you tell me a little bit about, on a technical level, what made this breakthrough possible?
I mean, there are multiple perspectives or multiple aspects that, of course, add always latency to it. So one thing why we actually also really aimed for having a good latency is that we want to make actually image generation part of just the communication to the user. If you, for instance, say, let's say, for instance, can you explain to me the concept of photosynthesis? Then essentially maybe even generating an image is helpful, just to basically communicate. And if you as a user basically have to wait when suddenly an image or a minute for an image, it suddenly like breaks down the whole like interaction and user satisfaction definitely goes down. And to make that basically possible, we really try to get down the latency on every different aspect. So for instance, we're using also a Flash model at the moment as a backend, so that this basically just gives you the speed acceleration. Of course, on the image generation side, we have done also a lot of like improvements to get it like fast. Like there are also a lot of standard techniques out there to do that. But it's always a trade-off, right? You can always scale it bigger and bigger, but it's also the question of when do you actually get the benefits out that still users would want to wait so long. So I think we kind of try to get there kind of a good balance between the two aspects.
Yeah. If you had to, pick, put your finger in something, was it because you folks had better data? Was it because you had better, faster chips? Was it because of some algorithmic breakthrough? Was it a mix of all these things, or do you feel like there was one aspect that really helped you make it this fast?
I think in terms of speed, it was more on the algorithm side. I mean, data obviously always helps. Like if you have better data, that means you can potentially have a smaller model at still the same size. But it's something like we iterated over different versions. Some of them were slower. I think initially we also from the product side had the argument that actually users don't care so much about latency. Personally, I was really pushing for the latency, and there was also like a last minute weekend sprint to basically get this actually over the line that we have this algorithm or the algorithmic benefit of being now so fast behind it. And I'm happy that we actually were able to land basically the fast version of it.
Amazing, amazing. That's a great answer. I want to talk about, ask a follow-up question to what Nana said before about how it's so great at preserving detail. Again, I've done it with my own images. I've done it with a few other things. I always take these videos and post them to YouTube, and I'm always trying to generate like a nice thumbnail for YouTube. And the previous models, even though they're good, just haven't been able to, for some reason, do not produce my face correctly. I always end up coming up with a really big jaw, like that whole like meme you probably see on Twitter with the guy with the big jaw. Like that's for some reason what I always end up looking at, and so I was never able to do that, right? So I always had to go to a designer, pay them. But now I feel like when I'm looking for a thumbnail, it's a lot easier to generate at least my own face, which I wasn't able to do before. Again, both on a technical side or even a product side, like what needed to happen to enable that, and for folks who are not technically educated, like I'm not, what needed to happen technically for this to become reality, and what was sort of like the barrier this whole time to making this possible?
From a technical perspective, one side is always the data. Essentially, we definitely like scaled up the data, and specifically for essentially character consistency, because you have to imagine you need now pairs of images where also potentially it's like the same person behind it or the same object. And also on essentially the side of the algorithm development. So there are still some improvements that we found actually to be like a lot better, especially in this like pixel perfect editing, which we then further developed. And I think to a certain degree, it was actually also surprising to us how well it worked in the end. It's kind of always a bit of like the secret source of data. If you get the right data, the right algorithm, it sometimes just really works. And this was like this interplay. I think either or alone would not have worked, but just it started to suddenly work like 1 week, and then we were like, okay, we have to really double down on it and get the best character consistency out that we can.
Have there been any use cases that have really surprised you? I know a few sort of, memes and viral trends have taken off, but was there anything specific that you hadn't expected that has sort of like taken off?
The great thing about this model is I'm surprised by it every hour. Right now, people are sending like within our chats like 80s like photo shoots of themselves. I saw a cute dog. It's always like every hour is something surprising. I think the one that was most touching maybe is people using it to kind of reimagine really old pictures. I have a really old picture of myself, which I'd cut around as a kid because I wanted to scrapbook. And now as an adult, I was like, I wish I had the proper like full landscape picture. I just put it in the model and in the Gemini app, and I said, "Hey, can you like fill in this image? It was supposed to be a landscape," and it did. And now I have that on my phone. I share that with my family, and they're like, "Oh, good. Don't you wish you hadn't cut it off?" It's like, yes, yes, I do. But it's. I think it's the fact that this model is so generalist. It allows for it to surprise us. Our eval strategy is going to have to evolve to kind of build in for all these use cases that people are loving, which is such a privileged position to be in.
Even also from the research perspective, let's say, for instance, when we had early iterations of a model, of course, we played also around with it and put our own faces in and so on. But let's say that like, I would not have expected that this figurine trend was like so popular in the end. Because it's, you, of course, like as a research scientist, you have a couple of evals, you're running them and you're like, yeah, it's a good model, you try to be there. But whatever users decide in the end is like the most popular, the most attractive to them. you cannot judge. So that's why like it's actually very nice to always build a very general model and then just let the users have a go at it and see what is like the most fun for them.
Yeah, the figurine one took me back a little bit as well because again, right, like ours or newsletter All Father, are geared towards professionals. So the woman on our team who creates our tutorials every day was like, this thing is taking off. Are you going to put it in the newsletter? And I really hate micromanaging anyone or pushing anyone back, but I sort of said, yes, okay, let's do it. I was like, man, this is a professional newsletter. I don't know if you should be having like figurine tutorials in here, but I was like, fine, let's do it. And it blew up. Like people loved it. Like so many people replied to that newsletter being like, oh my God, I love this so much. And I was like, okay, great. People are loving
Give the
this.
people what they want. Give the people what they want is what we realized.
Exactly, 100%. Um, this isn't the first image model that's coming out of Google. There's been earlier models. There's been some challenges with some earlier models as well. Won't go too much into that, but we've come to a point where Google seems like and DeepMind seems like they're leading the pack at this point. What has had to happen behind the scenes to enable such fast growth?
I think it's a mix of a lot of things. It's understanding the value in image and just like visual communication and how core it is to everyone. Like if I were to teach a child how to do like a simple math problem, like 2 plus 3, I wouldn't just give them the problem. I would maybe put 2 apples and 3 apples in front of them and then have them count it out and they'd get 5. It's so core to the way we communicate, the way we learn, the way we share, that it just like felt like the right thing to do for Gemini to then be multimodal, for it to understand multimodal context, but then also output itself and communicate back with the user in a multimodal fashion. And I'm excited that like we started this journey, but it's definitely not stopped. There's a lot more we want to do in this space.
For some folks, when I talk to them, I say, hey, there's this new model. It's like multimodal. It can do text, it can do image, it can even do like audio, and they're like, so what? Like, I can just do them independently in separate models. Like, why should I care? And, now some, new models can even, routing to different models and getting work done through those models and so on. So the real question is, I'd love to hear this more generally as well, but specifically towards image as well. Why does it matter to have a multimodal model?
I think especially so on one hand, of course, the user experience improvement, but what I'm more excited about is, for instance, education. So in education, for instance, if you come by and say, okay, I have a math problem, sometimes like, let's say you have a homework, you could either write out the whole question, like especially for instance, a math problem, try to write it out. Gemini gives you maybe back like 2 pages of explanation. But to be honest, who really wants to read often like all of these long things? Let's say you have, for instance, a geometric problem. It's way easier. Take a picture of probably the initial diagram that you have as input. You don't even have to type out the question. You just ask Gemini, can you help me with that problem? And basically Gemini now, by being multimodal, on the one hand can understand the input. Basically it can already see the diagram, understand it without you having to write out everything very explicit. But on the other hand, it can actually also now respond with basically images. So let's say, for instance, the math problem, you have to add like extra lines and show that basically at a certain cross point, it gives you the solution. Now basically this model can actually do it. It can basically take your original input diagram, show you how actually visually the whole thing can be solved. And I think this is something that also like we humans are just much easier sometimes to understand it in images. Like sometimes an image says more than 1,000 words. And that is something that we really want to enable with this interleaved model, which you cannot do if like everything is separate, because then the user explicitly has to ask, give me an image. And I think that especially like from my perspective, I want to move away. We don't want that the user always has to say, give me an image. Just whenever we've basically Gemini thinks it's easier to explain in an image, then use it. Then it's basically a nice way of communicating to the user.
Before we move on, a quick message from our friends and partners at Vanta. Startups move fast, and with AI, they're shipping even faster. That means startups are attracting enterprise buyers even earlier, and the right kind of security can make a deal or break it. Vanta's AI and automation make it easy to meet buyer expectations in just days. Their technology continuously monitors your compliance so your deals are never blocked. With AI changing regulations, Vanta knows what's needed and when. And they've built the fastest and easiest path to get you there. Listeners of our show get a special $1,000 discount when they sign up. just go to vanta.com/superhuman. That's VANTA.com/superhuman. Yeah, 100%. I think for me, one of the most common like multimodal use cases is I love taking screenshots of things and then getting explanations for those things. So for example, sometimes when I write an ad, for example, I just don't want to, copy paste and explain everything that's going on in this ad and so on. So what I'll just do is like I'll take a screenshot, I'll put it in, I'll say, okay, I just wrote this ad copy with this image. What feedback do you have? We also have a product team. We have product studio. We create products as well. So a lot of times, what I'll do is, I'll go into Figma. I'll like quickly design the feature. Sometimes I just design it myself if the PM or the designer doesn't have time to do it. And then instead of like waiting for the PM to improve it now, or waiting to get like tough user feedback on why this new feature is so crap and why this thing doesn't work, I'll just like upload it into models now and I'll just get feedback from like, I'll enable like, deep thinking, and I'll basically say, okay, think deeply about this. You're a user. Tell me everything that is wrong with the UI of this page and how I should be thinking about making this more usable, more easy. And it's always something like I have like 5 different call to actions or 5 different actions that I want the user to take. And the model's like, maybe cut it down to like one or two and break it down to like a next page so you can make it easier for users. So yeah, no, I definitely think, personally in my day-to-day, I'm finding a multimodal to be very helpful. Do you guys like look at this model and just get depressed because like what's left? I feel like it's just so perfect when I see it. Like it's fast, it's cheap. I guess it could always get cheaper, but I as a user, I just don't understand what's left with image models at this point. Like I have a hard time telling. Like everything just looks perfect. There's so many, whatever was left on the technical side seems to be taken over by very clever prompting tricks that folks have come up with. So when it comes to generating an image, I don't know, maybe it's like 99.9%, maybe it'll go to 99.995% or something, which will be hard for me to tell, but I would just love to get your perspectives. I guess, Philip, first from your side, on what is left from a technical perspective. Like, what are still some things, which need to get solved? And then, Nana, would love to hear from your side, what are some things that users would love to see that, we're not able to enable yet from a technological perspective?
Yeah, I think if I look at the model, I'm not really feeling depressed. I'm actually more excited about knowing how
Exactly.
much headroom we still have.
Exactly.
Like, it was actually like more of our model. Okay, this is like our first model. We know we can improve on a lot of different aspects on it. But then it was actually also surprising to us how well it already worked. So I think like from a like using perspective, one thing that we know we still have to improve is, for instance, text rendering. And something that I would love to have at some point is, for instance, I have, for instance, let's say a Google Doc where I wrote all of kind of technical details and I need to do a presentation. So how about just putting it to Gemini and be like, okay, generate the whole presentation of just basically with image generation, one per slide. And that would be basically something that you have like text rendering has to be very good. It needs to have a good composition. It needs to be basically consistent across. All of these things we know are basically quite good. And another thing that we know we still have to improve on is like this what we call no ops, which basically means that there are still sometimes you put an image into the model, asked it to edit, and sometimes there are just failure cases where it didn't do the edit. And this is something that like we are very aware of, and we actually have also like ways now of mitigating it. So we're actively basically improving it, and something that we also hope to soon basically release in a follow-up, like to have a much better and consistent model. Since in the end, I mean, as you mentioned, currently like a lot of people found like very complicated or like sophisticated prompts for all different use cases. But imagine everything just comes down to just a short user prompt. Anyone can do it within like a few seconds. You don't even have to do much of prompt engineering. This would be also like another step forward that we can really get from these models.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. Nana, over to you. Do you feel like there's anything that, users are really struggling with at this point that you'd really like to say enabled from the research or the technology side?
We're currently like serving images at 1K. I think the next big thing is like we want to be serving 4K, bigger. Like people should be making billboards with models. Like it'd be incredibly interesting to kind of be collaborative with someone regardless of what industry they're in, right? We want to be a collaborator to people who are making marketing assets. We want to be a collaborator to people who are building UIs. We want to be a collaborator to someone who's like, I want to start a knitting project and here's a sweater I really liked. Can you break down the steps for me and show me the knits? Like we want to be an assistive to people along all their journeys. And so we built, like you said, we've got like the visual part down, and there's like definitely some iterations we want to do there as well. But now it's just figuring out what verticals we can be helpful in and being like driving the impact for that vertical, be it education, being crafting, marketing, anything. It's just kind of nailing down those verticals, and I'm excited for like everything. We were at the start. We've like come to the start of like the racetrack, and now we're like, right, let's do this. Let's just go for it.
Awesome. We talked a little bit about, both the consumer use cases and some of like the business use cases as well for day-to-day professionals. What about developers, right? So if you're using this model and you want to build something, plug it into your app and, whether that's as an add-on feature, as a core feature, whatever else that might look like, what's really new here that developers should be paying attention to?
In terms of new, there are like two things that kind of for me stood out for developers. One thing is, of course, especially in like apps, like if you give it, for instance, all your UI and say, okay, I need to design now, for instance, a button, or I need to design a logo, or like additional parts. This model is now actually very good in creating like small assets that fit to your current UI. But the other thing that I'm actually a bit more excited about is the fact that you can now use image generation to imagine and draft first UIs. So let's imagine basically you say, okay, I want to build a new app. Can you just help me iterate over potential designs? And of course, you can do it first in code, but it probably takes quite some time to first write up a draft. Whereas if you just do it with image generation, then basically the model just gives you out very quickly like 5 different versions. You can maybe say, okay, let me actually pick like, for instance, option 3. And now since Gemini is also multimodal, this can now actually help you to transform then this generated UI into code that gets close to the UI that looks like that. And this is something that where you can really see now image generation being also part of your developer use case, which initially we didn't design the model for, but just by the generality of the Nano Banana and Gemini, we unlock essentially such new capabilities and use cases.
Yeah, I think personally, again, I mentioned, we're building apps on the side ourselves as well. And one of the things we found is we were working on a feature a few months ago for one of our products, which was related to image generation. And we've abandoned the feature because it simply took too long to load the image. So what we were noticing on that screen is the rest of the app is extremely snappy. And, we're living in 2025. People expect everything to take like less than half a second to load and work. But loading images was taking taking 30 to 60 seconds through the API. So users were thinking that the app no longer is working and they drop off the feature. So we completely abandoned it, right? But now we're noticing, we're like started testing again with a small cohort of sort of like internal users at the company. And now folks are finally saying, okay, this is so much better than what we were seeing before, just because, like the time to value or the reduction in friction is just so much better with this model now. I want to ask a few questions. Nana, you're from product. Philip, you're from research. I want to ask a little bit about what the culture and the relationship between both functions look like. I think Google is somewhat unique in the sense of like it has a very strong research core. It's had some of the best scientists across a bunch of different fields. I don't want to say this, but I think it was Ben Thompson from Sakari who said something like, Google's like a research company first and a product company second. In research, like, how are you picking problems? Is it being informed by the feedback that product is giving you in terms of what users want? Or is it more being informed by, no, we have, we're at the cutting edge of the science. We have a, sort of like a longer view into, what can technically be accomplished here. And then, Nana, after that, I'd love to ask you as well about, once research comes up with some kind of breakthrough, how is that getting translated into a product feature? Because now, I think before these things used to take years, but now it almost seems like it's happening like, seems like research coming up with a breakthrough and it's being brought into public products within like a few weeks or a few months now.
Yeah, I think the interplay is actually like working quite well. So especially for the research perspective or for Nano Banana, I think it started more of like a research side. Like we had already the Gemini 2.5 Flash image out and we knew we wanted to improve it. So we basically first set out to just on the research side, try to improve it as good as we can on the algorithm side, on the data side, and essentially things that we knew this model would be useful for and we also really want to enable. And once we started seeing that the model really started to work, we have a close collaboration basically with a product side that essentially like we give out for like early previews. Then we get feedback essentially from the different product teams saying, okay, this works really well. Can we basically further improve it by adding basically XYZ? And especially now that we have launched Nano Banana, there's basically a lot more feedback coming in. And knowing for us essentially then, okay, there are so many things that we can improve. And also like for us, it's really helpful to get the product feedback because it means how can we have the most impact also with the model outside. And we're then basically continuously improving the model, sending back to also the product teams, get feedback quite quickly. And with that, basically really improve our models further and further.
Great. Nana, I would love to hear from your side as well, right? Like, what does a relationship with research really look like? And what does how do you guys basically decide what research or what breakthrough is getting translated into a product or a feature next?
Yeah, I think, like Philip said, like the collaboration's always incredibly close. We're privileged to kind of work with incredibly smart people, and there's no dearth of ideas. I think our conversation is always this is where users will see the most value, and so if we want to be like on a consumers, this is what consumers will respond to, this is what developers will respond to, and this is what enterprise will respond to, and so kind of building out those stories. And like Philip said, we had like Gemini 2.0, now it's 2.5. It's like figuring out always who's the next like sector we want to target and what would it take to build for that. And research always has like amazing ideas and like are always one step ahead of the pack. Like they're always asking, oh, we can do this. Is this valuable? Like, yes, it would be, because like if you want to do, let's say like higher resolution images, absolutely. Like, let's do something crazy with that. And so it's always like this conversation and figuring out. And then we also talk to both folks at Google who would like to use this model, but also folks outside. We get, I think we're very lucky that on day one, we shipped with our partners at Adobe, at FreePick, and we also got a lot of feedback from them. So what would it take for them to be using this model? And then we can kind of route that back to research as well and kind of build out that roadmap. But yeah, I think like someone said this a few days ago, good ideas come from anywhere and they come from everywhere. And our job is kind of just being open and kind of figuring out that story.
I think earlier this week, or maybe it was late last week, Demis Hassabis tweeted that the Gemini app is now the most downloaded app on the App Store. I saw some folks from the research team who also had tweets around how much Nano Banana usage is going up. So first question is that sort of like surge up is the App Store happening because of Nano Banana at this point? Or is it something else? I'm sure there's other things as well, but is Nano Banana the main factor behind like sort of like the global surge in downloads right now?
I think we're definitely the one melting our TPUs the most, as our teams would tell us. I think it takes a village, right? I think we have a great model, but we also have like the Gemini app team, their SRE team, like actually like literally trying to cool down TPUs, getting this model into more and more people's hands, like doing the social listening, seeing what gets people excited. It takes a village to kind of like take one, like something that like us as a team are excited about and kind of spread that out. And we're so grateful and like so thankful to everyone doing all the firefighting always. But it's more, it's always this and more.
A lot of folks who, tune into this, they want to hear from folks like you who are on the cutting edge of AI and just technology in general. And they're specifically very interested in how you're using AI on a day-to-day basis. Whether that's research, code generation, image generation, whatever that is, would love to hear some specific use cases of how you're using maybe some Gemini or some other AI tool in your day-to-day.
I'm using it as a collaborator, like first and foremost. It's very rare that I'm like if I have a research question I want to ask, it's very rare that I'm like going and doing a bunch of searches, kind of figuring that out. I'm very much going to Gemini, asking it here's a question I want answered. Here are some sources that I think are relevant to this answer. Can you go like figure this out for me? It comes back with a report. I'll distill it, and I'll be like, okay, great. Here's the key pieces I think are valuable from this report that you've put together. Can you help me write like a PRD? Can you help me like think through what it would take to like take this idea to market? So really as someone that's like supercharging me. And then visuals, I'm using our models so much more to kind of communicate, like if to just understand things. Like, I had to Google how do TPUs work? Because in the past 5 days, I've had to learn that. And so just how do TPUs work? Show me like an image of them working together. And so it's been really great to kind of use, really like learn visually for the first time, and then learn much quicker and much more like and retain the information much better. Uh, Philip, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me it's like main of two use cases. One is like the classical like engineering and coding help. I mean, there are a lot of like open source tools, but of course Google has also their own internal versions of it. So like when we program, like it's very easy to just ask Gemini basically a question about the code, or let it, like I like it to write my unit tests, because that is always something like you have to do it, but like it's also not the most interesting. And now just basically shortly prompt, here's a unit test kind of that I wanted, just write it for me, makes it so much easier and basically makes your code more debuggable. And the other thing is also still like from the research perspective, like there's so much also open source research coming out, and it's hard even for us to sometimes like keep track of like all of the papers being published. So I started to also use like deep research to often like summary of different papers coming out, trying to go deep into a field. Like, of course, I can Google search it myself, but then it takes so long. And it's more like I started on the site, I go back to my normal work, and then like after 10 minutes or something, I go back and then see actually what it all summarized. And that helps us, for instance, also sometimes to see, okay, what is kind of new at the moment, anything that we think would be actually fitting for our research to steer, and just kind of a good companion to go along there.
I'm sort of like hooked to deep research as well. So I've always been like, been in B2B SaaS sort of like things for a time, and I've never built like a consumer app, but recently started building a consumer app around voice. By the way, we're using Chirp for that, for the text to audio parts. And I literally am just doing things like just downloading like these reports of how to build like a viral app and all the different features that go into it. Maybe this is like a live like, uh feature request, but I think the one of the things that I find to be really missing from deep research right now is it doesn't show images. I mean, it sometimes has images in there, but it doesn't really show images. And both from like a search perspective, like so for example, like this viral app stuff. So the first time I generated this report, so I generated with like, Cloud ChatGPT Gemini to look at all the outputs. And I think the thing that I found missing across all of them is I was like, there's only so much that I can learn about viral app design from reading like these deep research reports. I wish it would just pull some images because there's like case studies and everything on the internet and other folks have done it. So I was like, it's going to these blogs and it's understanding these things. I just wish it pulled the pictures and put them in. Maybe there's some commercial reason that can't be done. Um, so what I did the next time when I regenerated, I was like, okay, this time please link directly to all of these places where you've learned all these different design patterns and growth hacks and everything else. So going back to your point, Philip, like yeah, deep research, I'm addicted. Like, yeah, I basically when I wake up in the morning, like as I'm working throughout my day, I'm always like sending out different deep research reports. And basically what I do is at the end of the day, because I'm just so tired of looking at my laptop, I have my printer next to me. I printed all these different reports and I try to like skim through them through the night. So
I fully agree that this is kind of a perfect place to actually add more multimodal there. And I think it's also something that before Nano Banana, like our like request amount of basically multimodal queries was not that high. But now seeing actually that if you have a very good model, suddenly everyone wants to use it, gives us also like of a team basically more leverage of saying, okay, let's actually integrate it in all of the different use cases. Because clearly, if we have a good model, people will use it. And that's something that, yeah, I would love to see also basically starting to become more and more towards this one omni model, basically doing all of the modalities across all of the stack that we have.
I guess we're, coming towards the last 10 minutes here. So just a couple of closing questions. I guess, Philip, this time we can start with you. What are some things that are happening on the research side that you're really, really excited about? I'm not asking you to disclose your research roadmap here, but, just want to understand, just generally both, within AI and within Google DeepMind, like what are the really exciting research spaces that you and your team are focused on right now?
I think so. This is also kind of already that multiple teams and different companies are also going for. Like we know that LLM started basically with a single modality of text, and we're starting to add more and more modalities in there. And with Nano Banana, basically we're starting to add also image generation, but there's still like video generation, audio generation, everything basically becoming just natural to the model. And this is something I think we are generally heading towards as a field of AI also, just one single model for all modalities. And that's something that I just want to see also then in all kind of cases. Let's say, for instance, for the user communication, we integrate images more naturally, as I said, but also, for instance, thinking traces. Let's say, for instance, we humans sometimes draw sketches on the side and it helps us to think about it. So why should not LLM also do it if it can be helpful, right? So in some cases, of course, like if I ask it 5 plus 5, please don't make an image out of that. But if we really start to make like more complex things where you have to reason about it visually, something like that it actually becomes also part of natural thinking is something that we are excited about. And I think we will also very soon see actually these models to think in all kind of different modalities as we humans sometimes do.
Awesome, awesome. I have a follow-up research question there. I saw yesterday that Fei Li sort of like shared this demo for new world model that that they're building at their company. Uh, Lots of companies have image models and video models right now. For someone who's completely non-technical, what are sort of the key in terms of just research methodology or like problems within the space? What are the key differences between building image models versus video models versus something like a 3D world model?
Images is always like the starting point, because if you cannot generate an image, you probably cannot generate a video. So it's always like easier step to first generate an image. Although sometimes you care about like higher visual quality and all of that, but generally like the starting step. Then the video models basically have to take an image and actually make like physics work in it. So there you start to see that the models need to have like much better understanding of how do things interact, how does, for instance, gravity work, how does time really relate to it. And we still see like some key issues of, for instance, when you have very quick motions going on, it is something that our video models are not that great yet at generating, and it remains basically a difficult part. So it's clearly something that we still have to work on. But then on the world side, so basically a world model is kind of already what you, to a certain degree, need to have for video generation and also sometimes for image generation. Since you need to understand the physical world, you need to know how things interact. But sometimes for a world model, you don't need to basically be able to pixel perfectly make a video. Let's say if we ask now someone just like make me a video and we just give it like you have to specify all of the pixel values, we're probably not good at it as humans, but we have a very good world understanding. So it's not strictly necessary that you need to be able to generate a video to have a strong world understanding, but probably vice versa. To be a really good video generation model, you need to have strong world knowledge. And these kind of things like all interact, and they are basically necessary for different use cases. Like a robot might need a really good world understanding to know what it can do and what impacts it will have, while it doesn't have to generate a video. So depending on your use case, different aspects are probably there more interesting.
On the product side, what are some user problems or features or new products that you're really excited about?
Two things that come to mind. One is the ability to really personalize the model. And that comes in image as well as everywhere else. Like for right now, if I want to generate like a birthday card with my parents on it, I have to like provide the image. Whereas in this ecosystem I'm in, like let's say we know what my parents look like. Like I can like provide that. I can maybe connect photos, for example, or something. Like I can give that kind of corpus of information that it can rely on, and I can say, hey, it's my father's 80th birthday. Can you generate a card? Sure, here's an image, a watercolor card for your father that says happy birthday on top. Great, I can just shoot that over to him. So this idea of the model kind of growingly becoming personal, and like the apps that build around it growingly become personal, to me, that's really exciting to me. And the other is kind of this whole the aspect of collaboration and like proactively being collaborative with the user. I think that Phillip's kind of touched upon is actually something that I'm kind of really excited about. Just being able to not just offer an image but offer a video, or just kind of preempt what the user would next need or what would be the most helpful, is always great. I think I was trying to plan travel, and it's very kind of like it feels very regimented. Like figure out, do I need visas? Then how do I do flights? Whereas the model should have that understanding of like, if I'm talking to a human, what would the next question be? If I was talking to a travel agent, what would the next thing they ask me? And for that model to kind of preempt and collaborate with me, I'm really kind of excited for that journey and just making my life a lot easier.
Yeah, this was awesome. I really enjoyed this. It's not often that we have both product and research on the same call, but today we do. So it was like, yeah, really interesting for me to learn how this works.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Was really fun.